There we go. You should hear me now. I don't know what just happened right there. All right, it's a live episode of Locked On Pelicans. The Warriors and Hawks want Brandon Ingram. The Pels maybe want Jimmy Butler. Oh, and Trey Murphy III might be a superstar. It's 3 days to the NBA's trade deadline. Let's make sense of it all here in a live episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on Monday night. This is the Tuesday show, coming to you live after the Pelicans just lose to the Denver Nuggets here. I'm spacing out. 125-113. We'll talk more about this game in the third segment of today's show. We're going to skip it entirely. And then Trey Murphy just did all of that. 41 points, back-to-back 40-point games. He's taking a big leap. We're going to talk about it a little bit later in the show, but I want to get into the trade rumors around Brandon Ingram. Other trade rumors for New Orleans too, particularly with Jimmy Butler. Does that make sense? Does it not? And then we'll get into the game. So we got a lot to cover here. It's just a couple of days until the NBA's trade deadline. And yeah, things are going to be flying. So we're going to cover it all here in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, literally in New Orleans, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast for a reason, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. This is a live show. So what we do on the live shows here, whether you're new or you've been here before, we're going to do the full show, all 3 segments like I normally would. And then we do a bonus segment that's just on YouTube where I'll interact with the chat. I'll answer your questions. So if you have questions, try and save them a little bit. If you're an everydayer, by the way, let me know in the comments over here as well. Please don't spam the chat. We'll get to everything. Otherwise, I got to mute y'all, and I don't want to have to do that. So let's get into all of the latest buzz around this team, around the Pelicans when it comes to the trade deadline, because that is on Thursday here. So we've got a whole batch of rumors that we are going to run down. And let's start with one of the teams that's been the most rumored, and maybe it has the most realistic chance, even if I don't see it, of trading for Brandon Ingram. And that is the Toronto Raptors. Mark Stein and Jake Fisher have mentioned them a lot that I've seen. That's a team that has the pieces to make a move, expiring salary that makes sense. And they have their GM, Masai Ujiri, who is someone who wants to compete. He's known to not really want to go through a rebuild. He's known to take big, bold chances. He did with Kawhi Leonard the year that they won the NBA title before the bubble. So this is a team that's kind of known for taking some of those swings here, and they probably feel like they've been bad for too long. So could they make a move for Brandon Ingram? And I think the answer to that could be absolutely yes. I don't quite see it because to me, adding Brandon Ingram to that team doesn't really put them over the top here. And if you're the New Orleans Pelicans, given that the trade deadline is Thursday, if you just get expiring salary back and maybe a pick, that would be different. But if you don't even get a good draft pick and it's just expiring salary, I don't love the idea of trading Brandon Ingram. And to be honest, I'm really not that interested in RJ Barrett and his contract. He has 2 more years left beyond this for a total of almost $60 million. I don't think he's a particularly great player, not efficient either. And while Zion and him are friends, grew up together, that's great. It might clog your books already. And we've seen New Orleans trying to kind of massage the salary cap a little bit and figure out what to do with the money on their books and not be put in a bad position because of bad contracts, or not bad contracts, just kind of top heavy in terms of your roster. I don't want to see them run into that position again. And I think New Orleans doesn't want to be in that position again because you're kind of just committing to the same thing for the foreseeable future. So if you don't have RJ Barrett in there and you do something like Chris Boucher and Bruce Brown, both are expiring deals, and that trade would get it done with the New Orleans Pelicans for Brandon Ingram. At that point, you can make this deal work. Does that make sense? Because if they're just expiring contracts, Brandon Ingram's an expiring contract. You can just let him expire. You don't need to trade expiring for expiring necessarily. That doesn't improve the situation unless you're getting a pick or something like that back. Those two are, if you get a first round pick for him, different story. This does drop them under the luxury tax, which is worth keeping in mind as well. So yeah, it wouldn't be a great return, but there's ways to kind of accomplish what the Pelicans maybe want to accomplish if that's the case. So I don't love that trade. I don't think it makes a ton of sense for Toronto, but if they want to kind of roll the dice, that's a pretty low cost risk for them to be able to take. I want to get into another team that I find kind of interesting here, and that is the Atlanta Hawks, and their name has come up a bunch recently. And on the surface, it makes sense and doesn't. So bear with me for a second on this one. The Atlanta Hawks could have had Brandon Ingram this summer. DeJounte Murray was traded from Atlanta to New Orleans, and they offered up Brandon Ingram, trying to get Clint Capella, someone like that in the trade, bring in the starting center that they were looking for. And Atlanta didn't jump on that deal. They were not interested in bringing Ingram and potentially paying him after this season. So why would they be interested in him now? Is this just leaks from the Pelicans to build up a trade market for Brandon Ingram when, truthfully, from everyone I've talked to, there really has not been a robust one for him? I think that's kind of where you look at this and you're like, yeah, no, they're not going to be interested. They could have had him. They said no here. But where it makes sense is the Atlanta Hawks don't really control their future drafts, right? Those picks are in San Antonio from that DeJounte Murray trade. So they have no reason to tank and be bad because they won't get the draft picks. They won't get the benefit of doing that. So they need to go and compete, even if it's just kind of futile and you're never going to get past the play-in tournament. Look, that's better than having a top 5 pick that doesn't go to you. You're being bad and you don't get that draft pick benefit from it is definitely not what they want. So trying to go and trade for someone like a Brandon Ingram who could help you when he's healthy, at least be competitive, I think that maybe makes some sense for the Atlanta Hawks. This is kind of what we're going to talk about with the Warriors here next of, yeah, the season really hasn't gone the way we wanted. Atlanta at this point is 22-27. What have you got to risk by trading for Brandon Ingram? And I think you could probably pry Clint Capella away from them in a trade for Ingram. They have a Okongwu who's been good too. Capella is normally their starter. They just won on a buzzer beater tonight against the Detroit Pistons. Capella, I don't think, played in that game, and they looked bad without him. So if they are trying to be better, then I don't know if trading away your starting center, who is one of the more impactful players for them, like truthfully is the right move. But they're desperate, and desperate at the trade deadline kind of puts you in an interesting situation, I think. So I could absolutely see the Atlanta Hawks being like, we got to do something here. Let's just do this. Screw it. We're going to pay him because there's no point. If it doesn't work out and we're bad, whatever, if we're going to be bad anyway, we don't get the draft picks, at least kind of roll the dice on a guy like Brandon Ingram. I think you could see them talking themselves into this sort of thing. You maybe get Clint Capella. You maybe get Bogdanovich or is it Bojan Bogdanovic, whichever one it is there. They're not related, which is always weird. And you get rid of guys that aren't part of your future. So are you really giving that much? And if it doesn't work out with Brandon Ingram or for whatever reason he doesn't re-sign with you, I don't think it's the end of the world there. So those are two teams that do make a lot of sense. Another team, though, that I think is desperate, is the Golden State Warriors. Let's talk about them and then Jimmy Butler. Really? To the Pelicans. That's coming up here next in a live episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are some of your relationship green flags? We often hear about the red flags we should avoid, but what if we focus more on identifying the positive signs in our relationships, those green flags? If you're not sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify them, actively practice them, and even embody the green flag energy yourself. So whether you're dating, married, building a friendship, or just working on yourself, therapy can help you form relationships that love you back. Look, I love BetterHelp because it's entirely online. I've used it before. I don't have time to go to a doctor's office, but BetterHelp makes it easy by offering online therapy. And with over 30,000 licensed therapists to choose from, you got your options there. And if you need to switch therapists, you can do so at no extra cost. So discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. We're going to look at the Golden State Warriors trading for Brandon Ingram right now. We're going to look at Jimmy Butler. I'm going to tell you what's going on right there with everything. So we're going to break it all down here. So I appreciate you making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And if you are an everydayer, that means you listen Monday through Friday, let me know in the comments here as we're doing a live show. And don't forget about the free Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter. You can subscribe over at LockedOnDaily.com. Just put your email address in. You're going to get Locked On Pelicans in your inbox 5 days a week. We'll talk about this game, the loss to the Denver Nuggets, in the next segment here. And by the way, this is a live show. I see all y'all in the chat. I'm going to do my whole show, and then we do a bonus 4th segment. So that's when I'll interact with y'all, answer your questions, throw your fake trades in there. Tell me what you think about Trey Murphy III. We'll get into that. It'll be exclusively on YouTube if you're listening on the audio version, say, on Tuesday here. So let's look at 2 other things that I think are really interesting at the trade deadline here. We just went over Toronto. Okay. Atlanta, I think, could really make a lot of sense now that they're kind of desperate. But another desperate team is absolutely the Golden State Warriors. It sounds like they're as desperate as they are. Look, it's trade season. It's smokescreen season. You've got to try and not read too much into things that are out there because there's no teams do actually try and negotiate through the media. I can tell you stories about all that just coming to me here. I don't think any of that stuff actually makes a difference, but teams do it anyway. The Golden State Warriors the past day after the Luka Doncic trade, after the De'Aaron Fox trade, they were interested in Zach LaVine. That clearly has fallen apart. It sounds like they've been linked to everybody. They've talked about Jimmy Butler. I've seen them saying Kevin Durant, LeBron James they're trying to get him. All of those things sound absolutely ridiculous to me here, but that's kind of what's out there right now. They are desperate for any sort of help. So what about Brandon Ingram? What about Brandon Ingram for the Golden State Warriors? To me, there's no reason why they shouldn't do it at this point in time. Look at where they stand in the playoff standings right now. They're 24-24, but they have not done well over their last 10 games. Where are the Golden State Warriors? They're 5-5. This is not a team that's trending upward. And so if they're going to say like, no, we can't take the risk on Brandon Ingram, we don't want to give up some of these pieces, why the heck not? Because your pieces aren't doing it for you right now. The problem is Brandon Ingram making so much money is basically going to be some sort of Draymond Green and Andrew Wiggins deal or something like that to the New Orleans Pelicans, I think. I don't know if any of those guys truthfully make a ton of sense for New Orleans right now, and that's probably part of the problem. But could you I'm trying to get the trade machine to work and do a trade for y'all right here, but it's messing up, which is the dangers of doing a live show here. Here we go. Let's try and figure out a trade here where we send Brandon Ingram to the Golden State Warriors, and you do something like Andrew Wiggins coming back to New Orleans. Hey, Logan, let's see if we can throw Buddy Hield into that deal, though I don't know if they would do that, but Buddy Hield has not been great. You need to throw in a minimum contract player, so you'd be looking at someone like, let's see here, Trace Jackson-Davis could potentially work, and that's a deal that would work for New Orleans. Andrew Wiggins, Buddy Hield, Trace Jackson-Davis. It puts New Orleans deeper into the luxury tax. That's worth keeping in mind, so I don't think that would really help a deal get done. But if you took out Buddy Hield, someone they wanted to keep, maybe Kevon Looney gets sent to New Orleans, that deal should work. That one makes a little bit more sense. You would need picks from them in this sort of thing. That Andrew Wiggins contract, while I like him, is not something that New Orleans just needs to take on with Trey Murphy, with Zion Williamson, not that he plays the 3, but also Herb Jones as well. So with some of the wing depth that they have, there's no real reason to do that. You would need picks in some capacity to do this. You get off some of that money going into next season with an expiring deal there. So that could work. If you could get someone like Kuminga in there too, I think that would be even better. But look, Kuminga's an expiring contract. Are you going to give him the money that he wants? And I don't know if that's really the type of thing that New Orleans wants to do. Yeah, he's an interesting young player, but I'd rather get picks from them in some capacity if I'm giving up Brandon Ingram. But look, if you're trying to find some combination of a rotation piece that'll be on the roster next year and expiring salary to kind of help with your salary cap situation, you can probably find a way to make a deal work with the Golden State Warriors. And while on the surface, they weren't interested early on in the season, look, you had Steve Kerr coach Brandon Ingram on Team USA, and that didn't really go well. Kerr was kind of taking shots at him publicly. They're desperate. They sound like they are desperate. So if that's going to be the case, take advantage of these other teams' desperation if you know that Brandon Ingram isn't part of your future. One team, though, at the trade deadline that should not be desperate is the New Orleans Pelicans themselves. We're going to go into the Jimmy Butler talk right now. I have no interest in seeing Jimmy Butler on this team. It might be chaotic and fun for a year, but one of the things that you've got to notice with Jimmy Butler, and it's anywhere that he has been, it ends very poorly. Ended poorly in Chicago, ended extremely poorly in Minnesota, ended poorly with the Philadelphia 76ers, and is ending real poorly right now with the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat, right? Like, that's not a team that stars are like, get me the heck out of unless they are massively disrespected like what they did to Dwayne Wade. And that was a mistake, right? So this is not a team that loses players. So for Jimmy, this is a Jimmy Butler thing, in my opinion. You don't want to put Jimmy Butler on the team. If you think he's going to kind of wake Zion up or anything like that, not a chance. And to make the money work, it doesn't. If you're trying to build a trade around Jimmy Butler for Brandon Ingram, and those are the rumors that we've heard recently, it's really, really tough to figure out how to do this and keep New Orleans in a good financial position here. Jimmy Butler's making $49 million this year. He has a player option for $52.4 million next season. Maybe he opts out of it. Maybe he doesn't because he wants a long-term deal. So it would lower his cap hit next year. He won't make $54 million, $52 million, $52.4 million next season. If he signs if he opts out and signs an extension, it'll be lowered. It almost has to be. But if he wants that money, that's not a great situation. You need to figure out a way for the Pelicans to send out, about $9 million alongside Brandon Ingram to make this deal work. There just really aren't players on the team that it makes sense to do that with, unless you're somehow including CJ McCollum in the deal. And the deal that I've put out there a couple of times now is Jimmy Butler and Duncan Robinson for Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum. You also need to put in like a minimum contract going to the New Orleans Pelicans here, and that could easily be someone like Pele Larson, who actually I kind of like. That trade works. Jimmy Butler, Duncan Robinson, Pele Larson for Brandon Ingram and CJ McCollum. Here's the thing. And for those of you who want CJ gone, and he played incredibly well in this game tonight, at least in the fourth quarter, so I don't know if that's the correct move. If you want CJ gone, that's a way to do it. Here's the issue with that, though. If Jimmy Butler opts in to that $52.4 million player option, New Orleans is in the luxury tax next season by about $19 million. $19 million. Do you think this team is going to go into the luxury tax $19 million? The answer to that is unequivocally no. That's not happening whatsoever. So for New Orleans to be like, we're interested in Jimmy Butler, the doomsday scenario for them is if Jimmy Butler opts in to that $52.4 million thing. And if they're going to be short-sighted to try and go all in and make the playoffs, they have basically a 0% chance of making the playoffs. They would need to do better than win 3 out of every 4 games. They would probably need to win 5 out of every 6 games to make the playoffs, just to almost get to 500 right now. That's really not going to be the case for them here. So if that's not going to happen, there's no need to go after Jimmy Butler and screw your books up next season when they do want to try and be competitive, even if that's going to take a hit because of the DeJounte Murray injury. And frankly, that should change the Pelicans' entire strategy going forward. I've previously stated I kind of find this season a blessing in disguise. You get you get an incredible draft pick, and you can play some of the young guys and figure some things out in a pressure-free environment because you're not making the playoffs. So if you screw up, who cares? It's fine. But now are you going to be competitive next year if you don't have DeJounte Murray? And I don't know if the answer to that is necessarily yes. So the Pelicans should not do any sort of short-sighted move and probably need to consider a longer rebuild. Jimmy Butler doesn't really fit into that. I'd be willing to bet those trade rumors came from Miami and that New Orleans is not seriously considering trading for Jimmy Butler whatsoever because it absolutely makes zero sense if that's what they end up trying to do. I will rip the team if that's the direction that they go because I think that is such an incredibly incorrect move. Jimmy Butler just financially doesn't make sense. You'll recall that there was some reporting earlier in the season about the Pelicans trying to trade Brandon Ingram for Karl-Anthony Towns this past offseason, which would have been great, right before he went to the New York Knicks. The problem was the money that Towns is making. Well, it just doesn't work on the New Orleans books right now with the money being paid to CJ, being paid to Zion Williamson, and with Trey Murphy's extension set to kick in next season. He makes like $5 million this year. He's going to be making $25 million next season. So there's a $20 million spike that you need to kind of account for in any sort of deal. And that's important. So you've got to keep not just this season, but next season in mind. If you go back a couple of years, I was the only Pelicans media person that was like, the Pelicans won't trade Jackson Hayes. $7 million expiring deal. Everyone was like, they'll trade him for someone who's making $6 million. That $6 million on your books next year, when your salary's going up every year, that doesn't really make any sense. And that's something that's worth keeping in mind here when it comes to Jimmy Butler, that doesn't exactly work. Cody Winter says, Jimmy and a lot of picks. I don't think the Miami Heat have a lot of picks. So where are those picks coming from? That's where it gets kind of difficult here for the New Orleans Pelicans to make a Jimmy Butler trade work. And the other thing that's worth considering, the Everydayers heard this yesterday in the trade for De'Aaron Fox. 3 first-round picks, more than Luka got, right? Going to the Sacramento Kings, except all of those first-round picks suck. Joel Myers said it on the show. They got a first-round pick this year from the Hornets that's top 14 protected. It turns into 2 second-round picks. So they didn't really get 3 first-round picks. One of those is going to be 2 second-round picks. That significantly changes the return that they got. When they have that draft pick from the San Antonio Spurs next season, 2 seasons from now, who cares? They're going to have Victor Wembanyama and De'Aaron Fox on the team. Have you seen Wemby? All of those, when people are like, they should have gotten 6 first-round picks for Luka Doncic, 1, yes. But a lot of those first-round picks aren't that good. And is the 25th overall pick in a draft considered that good? Not really, right? And I think that's something that's worth keeping in mind when people say like picks, and all of that. So you've got to look at what those picks actually are. And Logan, I'll answer your question. Let me answer your question coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And we'll talk a little bit about this game and a couple of other things. So Is it that bad if Brandon Ingram walks? Let's answer that question coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, the Eagles and the Chiefs, and endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. So whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or my favorite, betting on the coin toss, tails never fails here. FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action, and with live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. If you give me an app that is clunky or anything like that, I won't use it. I use the FanDuel app a lot because it is that easy. And knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, just icing on the cake. So download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And for your second listen today, Locked On Saints with host Ross Jackson, one of my good friends here. He's like the nicest dude. Go support Locked On Saints. Make them your second listen today. It's going to tell you who the next Saints head coach is going to be and if Derek Carr is going to be the QB in the future. So let's answer Logan's question here. My one worry is we don't trade BI and he walks for free this offseason. Look, if you're trading him for just expiring salary, that's essentially what's happening here, right? You know, when I see some of these trades here, the reason you want some expiring salary is you don't want it all to be expiring. You want a rotation player that'll be on your team next season. Otherwise, you should just let BI walk. And one of the things that's worth keeping in mind if you don't trade him is, could you come to a short-term extension, a 1+1 extension, a 1-year contract with a second-year player option that basically kicks the can down the road on him for another year, and then you just trade CJ McCollum. And then you still have the ability to re-sign him. Players don't change teams in free agency, big-name players anymore. The everydayers have heard me say this. The Paul George situation going to the Philadelphia 76ers was a complete outlier this offseason, and it just doesn't work like that. It's extended trades and things like that now. So teams don't have the money to just go and sign him, right? Like the Pelicans are going to be needed to help facilitate a trade. So even if you hit the offseason with him still on your roster, Pelicans are going to get something in return in some sort of sign and trade. The offers be better now. But teams like we agree to sign Brandon Ingram to whatever the contract is, they got to make it happen then. You have a little bit of leverage on that team, and you might be able to get more stuff, picks, assets, players, whatever it is. That could really be an option for you all of a sudden in a way that isn't right now. Some picks get freed up, once the season essentially ends, once you hit the draft to be able to make that work. You have the draft, then you have free agency. Maybe you can get one of those young players or something like that in some sort of Brandon Ingram signing trade, or at least get like a traded player exception or something like that. I think those are massively overrated, but they're at least good to have. It's better than not. So I think those are some of the things that you could kind of keep in mind when it comes to Brandon Ingram and keeping him going into the off season here. So we're going to switch gears, and we'll answer your questions in the bonus part of the show after this. I want to get to this game here. Before we do that, I do want to mention the news about the Saints and Pelicans and the Archdiocese of New Orleans and providing what sounds like PR help to them on all of this. Truthfully, I'm not going to go that into it on the show. What I have to say is what went on with the Archdiocese, obviously needs to be condemned and should be condemned, and there's just no excuse. It's a horrible thing, and those people should be thrown in jail for a very long time for what they have committed here. When it comes to the Saints and Pelicans, one of the things I've learned over the past couple of years is I'm not qualified to speak on a lot of the off-court stuff. And I'd rather you go to those sources, whether it's The Guardian, whether it's WWL, or Ramon Antonio Vargas, who I know. Go to them for all of that and their opinions on it. I'm not actually qualified to give you those sorts of opinions. Why there's no politics or things like that on the show. I'd rather you go to better sources than me when it comes to that. If this leads to the teams being sold or something like that, we'll address that because that is relevant. But otherwise, I tend to just stick to the on-court stuff. But obviously, that stuff is horrific. And my take on this is the Pelicans and Saints had no need to get involved within this whatsoever and should not have been involved in this whatsoever. And I'm just going to leave it really at that because let's talk about trades, what happened on the court. That's what this show here does. So let's look at this game. 125-113, the Denver Nuggets over the New Orleans Pelicans. It comes down to this, and I just recorded a minute short. I haven't uploaded it yet, but I will. It'll be in Locked On NBA tomorrow. And here's what I said. Tell me if you agree or disagree. The way I open that, I always do that little open, then we hit an intro. I do that on the shorts that I do here too. And that is Trey Murphy the future? Because it feels like Trey Murphy III might be the future of this team. That's back-to-back 40-point games. Over his past 3 games, he's averaging 37.6 points per game. He tied his career high in this one against the Denver Nuggets. He put up 40 against the Boston Celtics when he was being defended by really good players. He had, 8 threes in this game? 8 of 12 from 3 in this game, 41 points. He has taken a very significant leap. A very significant leap for this team. The everydayers know this. What is the one thing I've said I want to see from Trey more so than anything else? And it was an improved handle. Get a handle, get a couple of moves in your bag so that you can get to the rim better. In years past, we know that he has the three-point shooting. We know that if you close out hard to him and give him room to drive, dude will drive down and dunk it right over you. But if someone stepped in his way, took a step in, kind of took away his path to the rim, he definitely kind of was attacking without a plan, without something in his bag to be able to get around those defenders or score over him. He's added 2 things that have helped with that, and that's what's made him the complete player. And that is, 1, the handle is significantly better so that if he gets close to someone, he can get around him, and that's a really important thing. And then the strength that if they meet him at the rim, rather than just trying to yam it on top of them, and it led to a lot of missed dunks from him. He now has the strength to finish through contact, lay it in, get to the free throw line, and then go and make those shots. He's having a leap year, a breakout season, and he has been really, really good for this squad, and it's been probably the brightest spot, probably brighter than Yves Missi, in my opinion. He has looked really good. One of the things that I always look at is the per 36-minute numbers. You know, if a guy's just playing more minutes, are his numbers kind of the same? Go look at Dyson Daniels. Someone that's kind of in there. Dyson is better, but it's not like this significant leap in certain categories. Trey Murphy a year ago was averaging 18 points per 36 minutes. This year it's 22 and a half, and that's not taking into account this game. And I think that's really worthwhile. His free throws are up per 36 minutes. The rebounds are slightly down. That's not an ideal thing, but the assists are up. The ball handling's better. That speaks to the better handle that he has. He is looking like, I'm not ready to fully declare it yet, but he is looking like the type of player that you could make the centerpiece of your team. Right? You know, we would talk about Zion's number 1, it would be Trey number 2. Is Trey a potential number 1? And I think the answer to that could be yes. And I was at the game on Friday. I'm at every home game. And I was actually in the party perch with a couple of friends. And, you know, we were all kind of talking as that game was unfolding after the DeJounte Murray injury and all of that. And kind of the thing that like we all kind of came to the same conclusion on, which I always think is great, is it's kind of all about Trey Murphy going forward, right? Now that we're not going to get to see a starting lineup with DeJounte Murray in it and what that might look like, this is kind of the rest of the season kind of becomes about Trey Murphy III's development and continued raising of his value. That contract that they signed him to is going to look like a steal in the future here, and he's locked in. I think that's a really, really fantastic situation for the Pelicans to find themselves in. 4 years, he's making $25 million, 27, 29, and then 31 million in 28, 29. That is going to be a wildly low number as we get used to some of the sticker shock and some of the contracts that guys are going to be signing. Right? That's less than what Brandon Ingram is making this season. That's a pretty impressive resume that he's going to have there. The strength is there. The free throw shooting is there. The rebounding needs to get up. But I think one of the things you're seeing from him right now is he's taking on a much more significant offensive load. That impacts you in other areas. When you've got to do the scoring here, his usage is up about 5% or so before, compared to last season. To take that leap, sometimes higher usage does not mean that you actually play better and there's a point of diminishing returns. You're not seeing that with Trey Murphy III here. Also in this game, CJ McCollum looked great, particularly in the fourth quarter. He had 30 points on the night, 5 assists, 6 rebounds, and it felt like no one else, including Zion, really did anything. Zion actually had some court gravity to pass the ball. He had 5 assists in this one, but they were really trying to take him away. Look at how everyone just kind of looked at him, which led Trey to being open. Trey should be taking the most shots probably going forward the rest of the season here, I think. So, is he part of the future? You tell me right now. So, there you go. JR265 actually has I love this comment from you. Like, I really mean this. This is a great question comment here because it's something that I talked about in yesterday's show. And this is something that I have talked about in the future. That is a problem, in my opinion, in the NBA. So JR, we're going to end on this, then we'll do the bonus show. JR265. Hi, Jake. I agree with what you said about how much Trey Murphy III is leap, but maybe trade Trey now if the right deal is out there. We missed out on trading Z and BI when their value was high. The best time to trade a player is either before their extension kicks in or the first year of the extension. Now, you actually can't trade him right now because of the extension and everything, but could be traded in a year and all of that. Yeah, you're right. The value's at an all-time high here for now. For Trey, it will probably, unless he takes another massive leap, it'll never get higher. I don't want to live in a world where you sign a guy to an extension just to trade him away because they have the most value. You know, there is definitely a little bit of an unspoken agreement between the team and their fans. And look at how the Mavs fans are revolting against the Mavs. If I were a Mavs fan, I would quit being a Mavs fan because of what they did with Luka Doncic. Even if they win a title, you kind of want to win with your guys. And it can't just always be about chasing value, in my opinion. That's why I've said, if there's a guy you want, overpay to go and get him. I would not trade Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis if that's your guy. I think that's kind of dumb. But overpay a little bit to go and get your guy. I think there's nothing wrong with that. So, but that's kind of the world that the NBA is in right now. You trade guys the most value they have in the beginning is at the beginning, but then why sign them to extensions and things like that? So it's a great point. That's something I've been talking about a lot. The everydayers know that. So here's what's going to happen right now in Locked On Pelicans. I'm going to kind of hit the outro video here, and then we're going to still stay on. So stay with me through the end of the outro video. I don't know why I do this. I just do it, and I like it that way. So if you're done, you don't want to hear the live Q&A, that's all cool. You can head out. I appreciate you tuning in. We had a lot of people here, a lot of people in the chat, and it is a lot of fun. I am excited for that. Let's interact with the chat for a little bit and talk with y'all here. A little bit of Locked On Pelicans After Dark that's coming up here next. So I'm going to do the outro. Stay with me. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 11,000 people on YouTube as well. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow. More trade talk, a couple other things too that I really want to get into. We're going to have a banger of a show tomorrow too. That's going to be a blow up show. Let's call it. See y'all next time. But we're really staying on. All right. We are back here with a little bit of, Locked On Pelicans After Dark, or whatever you kind of want to call it here, where I can interact with y'all. So put your questions in the chat. I see a couple of y'all have some in there that we will start to answer here. These are a lot of fun. I love doing these sorts of live shows where it's my chance to interact with y'all, read your comments, put them all in there, and we'll kind of get to everything. We'll go for, for a little while at the very least. So let's start with the Private Eye, AYE. Brandon Ingram to Detroit for Tim Hardaway Jr., Fontecchio, and multiple second-round draft picks. If the salary works, they want to do that. I'd probably jump on that. I think Tim Hardaway Jr., he's an expiring deal, right? So that kind of solves some of that. Fontecchio at times has kind of been underrated. So I think, maybe you at least get some draft picks. Detroit can kind of go all in. I don't think they should do that. If I were Detroit, I kind of find this as a found money year. Yeah, Tim Hardaway Jr. is an expiring dealer contract. Fontecchio, does that work? I don't know if that works for Brandon Ingram. You might need to have more money. Oh, no, it does, because they have tons of cap space. That saves the Pelicans $12.1 million this year. They would take that deal in a second, I think. But I don't think that's necessarily on the table here. And so that has stuff to do with it here. Okay, so let's keep going on here. Andrew Gutierrez says, unfortunately, it's a low ball for us, but Andrew Wiggins, Kevon Looney in a first this year for Zion. That's interesting. Do they have their first to trade this year? I don't know if they do. Maybe they do. I can't remember. I can't keep all of the other draft picks in there. I'd rather trade Ingram than Zion, but I think at this point I'm more open to trading Zion, and this is probably what we'll do in the show tomorrow about why I don't think they're going to be as competitive next year because of this injury to DeJounte Murray. So I think you need to consider blowing it up. So for the right deal, yeah. I don't know if that's the deal that I would necessarily take. As you said, it is a low ball. They do have their first round pick this year. It looks like they control their future drafts, which is actually really worthwhile for them if that's the case here. Christopher Friend says, Beal plus 3 picks to NOLA, BI to Miami, Butler to Phoenix. Pipe dream because Beal ain't waiving that trade clause. New Orleans would say no to that. No one wants that Bradley Beal contract. And those picks that you would get just aren't going to be good picks. That goes to that point that we talked about a little bit ago, where not all first round picks are equivalent. And if you're going to trade some of these guys, if you're going to take on Beal, I want really high draft picks. And I don't think the Pelicans can really make it work with the money here. All right. BP says, when is the NBA going to start calling fouls on Zion? It's going to get him hurt again. One of the things to keep in mind with this is guards and bigs are officiated differently. It's always been the case. It shouldn't be the case, but that's just kind of like an unspoken thing in the NBA. I've done the show that Zion should go to the line probably about like 3-4 more times per game, which is a pretty significant number. It's the shrug emoji. I don't know. That's not one of those things that you can necessarily do with everything. Doug Rosenthal has called me crazy, but I don't think possible trades are the big story today. Still buzzing about the involvement with the church sex abuse cover up. Like I said, there's the information out there. I don't think they should have been involved in that whatsoever. It doesn't sound like Roger Goodell was speaking today that the NFL is going to do anything. I can't imagine the NBA is. This was definitely a miscalculated move and not something that New Orleans that the franchises should have been involved in whatsoever. That's, I don't know, pretty obvious to me when it comes to that sort of thing. Andrew Winter says Zion looked disinterested on defense. I mean, everyone looked disinterested on defense, right? Like everyone looked very disinterested on defense when you are this bad, right? Like that's it. Their defense has fallen off a cliff this year. And I think that's one of the most interesting things here, that why has that been the case when Willie Green is a defensive head coach? It's point of attack defense leading to them getting blitzed at the rim. It's probably worth a deeper dive, but it's definitely stuff on the perimeter has kind of broken. And that's what's leading to a lot of the issues with the defense here. I don't think it's just Zion. I think it's kind of everybody, but certainly Zion has moments where he's kind of like a very good defender and then not needs to be consistent with it. It's, kind of really as simple as that sort of thing. Chris Flow 24, once BI gets traded, he's going to play like a man possessed. He seems like he'd rather play hard and even take less money for the right team. I mean, maybe I couldn't necessarily tell you that, but that's kind of the worry with Zion, right? That's now the worry with Luka Doncic and the Dallas Mavericks. There's a smear campaign going on against Luka Doncic from the Dallas Mavericks to try and PR spin this in their best interest when no, I'm not buying it. If he was that out of shape, you don't make the NBA finals. You don't do that by accident and dominate some teams too en route to that. So they're worried that now this is going to wake him up and Luka Doncic in shape. How good is that guy going to be, right? I think that's more of the concern, I think, for Zion Williamson than it would be about Brandon Ingram of, does Zion start to take things more seriously if he gets traded as like spite's a very strong thing. And what is that? How bad does the trade look like then? So yeah, that's a concern with any sort of player, but often guys are who they are. And we've heard that talk before and it doesn't necessarily end up happening here. Ill Relative says, Willie don't call no plays, no challenges. He does and doesn't. There's a mess when it comes to the offense here. The challenges, I'm less worried about that. They've done a very good job on challenges actually this year, but the criticism of Willie Green is completely valid here. Brian Pearson says, why don't we trade Brandon Ingram to Dallas for Anthony Davis, then trade a couple of small pieces to get Chris Paul back in New Orleans? Just reassemble everybody here, right? But that won't really happen here. Shay Ives says, finally caught you live for the first time. I appreciate you being here, even though you're losing interest in the Pelicans. Kenneth Poor, can the Pelicans retire Solomon Hill's jersey this year to help morale? That's not going to help morale. We don't need to talk about the Solomon Hill era, right? What were the corner boys, him and Dante Cunningham, which weren't actually corner boys when it comes to all of that. But yeah. Shay Ives says, how does the money on picks for BI work? Can we just get a couple of second round picks? I saw another one here in the chat when it comes to it. So when it comes to how do picks work? Oh, it's same person. You've got to match salary. There's two ways you operate in the NBA, and we don't need to do all of this right here. You're either an under the cap team or an over the cap team. If you're an over the cap team, salary needs to kind of be within pretty close to one another. So if you're sending out $30 million, you need to take back about $36 million unless you're trading to a non-salary, a cap space team, and then they can use it, but then they need to have enough salary cap space to be able to do it. The CBA is very complicated is probably the easiest way to put it when it comes to all of that. Pels need to get Ben Simmons or Josh Giddey. Absolutely not. Pistons will help Nola get under the luxury tax, but it'll either cost CJ or Ingram or Jose along with Green. Look, there's going to be a trade coming, right? Like there's going to be a trade coming here because they're going to get under the luxury tax. Whatever it might be, there's going to be a trade coming. It's as simple as that. Like they're going to duck the tax. So yeah, there's going to be something. They're going to have to pay a second round pick or two to be able to kind of make that smaller move to be able to do it, which is something that I absolutely hate here. Eric Roy says, I'm so sad we always have the talent but never luck. This is something that I've said here. I like that this front office has taken a lot of swings and chances. Going after DeJounte Murray this offseason was smart. You had BI and Zion, two all-star level talents, trying to build around that in a small market where you're not a free agent destination, knowing that the draft can be a crapshoot. Look at Jordan Hawkins this year, right? Is risky. And so trying to kind of make moves, even if they blow up in your face, I don't think is necessarily the wrong approach, right? This comes down to the idea of when people are like, there's things are cursed or it's the medical training staff, all that. Like sometimes you can just flip a coin 50 times, 100 times, and it comes up heads every time. It might not be common that would happen, but it is a actual probability. That does feel like it has happened here. So I look at a lot of this, and the way I've described it to a lot of people is it's just bad luck. Like some of these injuries are just pure bad luck. The DeJounte Murray injury is pure bad luck, right? That's not something that the training staff can necessarily prevent and do things with. And if you look at it, you don't see those injuries on the Pelicans. So the fact that it happened is just sometimes bad luck just keeps happening over and over and over again. And yeah, that really sucks here. Madison Bordenave says, BI to Charlotte for Grant Williams, Josh Okogie, and Mark Williams in a pick. I would do that, but Charlotte would say no. I would do that in a second, but I think that is definitely going to be a no here. Brian Pearson says, do you think the Pelicans coach comes back next year? No, I don't think Willie Green is going to be back next year. I don't think there's any point in firing him this season. At this point, earlier in the year, yes, absolutely. But at this point, no, I don't think so. So just kind of ride it out when it comes to all that. I will say that probably means they don't believe in James Borrego as a head coach too. So I think kind of moving on entirely from this coaching staff wouldn't be the worst thing to be able to do, even though I like some of the guy. I like everyone they have in theory when it comes to that. Key says, what's your one word? I like this question to describe Zion. Maddening, right? Like it's like the I just can't quit you kind of thing where, before the Murray injury, I'm like, bring him back, bring Zion back, bring CJ back, see what you have and see if this lineup's good because there's enough talent there to see that it like could work. But now with the injury, but it's maddening because if the Mavs are giving up on Luka, who's leagues better than Zion Williamson for a lot of the Zion reasons, probably means they should give up on Zion too. And so I think that's something that you've got to kind of look at when it comes to all of that here. CJ needs to be traded now because he still has a 2-year contract and you get 2 solid guys in 3 seconds. I don't know if you're getting 3 seconds for CJ McCollum. That contract's probably looked at as a negative. So you've got to kind of balance it out a little bit too. So that's an important thing to really look at when it comes to CJ McCollum is that's a lot of money that you're paying. And we're seeing teams be really scared of how their salary cap looks with that first apron, second apron, because that's the type of stuff where things get really, really restrictive. Look at the issues that the Bucks have trying to make a trade, the Suns have trying to make a trade. That second apron, when you're trying to kind of do things with your roster, is absolutely no joke. Doug Rosenthal, if Willie is in fact let go by the team, who do you think should be the head coach next year? I couldn't tell you just yet. I need to do a deeper dive on some of the names here. The first name that I would have gone after, and this is kind of funny, and I'll tell you all this, would have been Charles Lee, who's now the head coach of the Charlotte Hornets. That's who the Pelicans wanted to hire before they decided to choose Willie Green. It was Charles Lee, and then at the last minute, they ended up kind of kicking the tires on Willie Green and being really happy with what they saw from him. And we were all really happy with Willie Green that first year too. It's kind of changed a little bit, but he's off the table right now. That would have been my first choice, but I think now you've got to kind of look at different options here. But I think that kind of then starts to kind of come up in the offseason when you can do a much better coaching search when it comes to that. Benny, is it DeMarble? I'm probably mispronouncing that. BI for RJ Barrett, rumors still alive. We talked about Toronto in the beginning of the show. I wouldn't want RJ Barrett there. I don't honestly think Toronto would give up on RJ Barrett if they were willing to. I don't know. That kind of says some concern from me here. And so that's where I don't know. I wouldn't, if that's the best you can get, maybe. his contract he makes, let's pull him up because I've got to see it. Like, he's not a particularly great player, right? Like, that's kind of some of the concern here. He's averaging 21.6 points per game this season. He's doing it, it's not too bad, on 17.3 shots per game. He doesn't shoot the three ball at an elite level, but he does it in mid volume there. Assists and rebound numbers are good. Like, yeah, he's fine. Is probably, oh, no, there you go. His usage rate to do that is almost 30%. That's not a great, those aren't great numbers for a 30% usage rate, in my opinion. So that would kind of be the concern. He'd be taking possessions away from Trey, from Zion. 26 million this year, 27.7 next year, almost 30 million the final year of his deal. It's not awful, but like, I wouldn't put that on the books, and having him and CJ McCollum feels not quite redundant, but like, you just don't need that. It also still keeps the Pelicans in like salary cap kind of hell next year, and that's not what we want to see. The private eye says, I'm from Detroit. What is exactly the reason New Orleans is quitting on Ingram? Is it just the contract he wants, or is there more than meets the eye? Why does it seem like it's so easy to move on? He and Zion just don't fit. And then the contract, if he wants $52 million a year, like it's just not worth that. So that's kind of it, right? Like, he's out of contracts. You got to do something with it. They definitely waited too long with that. Mr. Strong says the center position is a joke. Griffin's built such a flawed team, and time's running out for any trades. I mean, at the trade deadline, you can do something this offseason, but likely, I think you're at the point where you consider blowing it up, or you're going to really go they can't really go more all in. I think that's kind of the issue here. So that's kind of what it is. But the rim protection, this year, if they were good on the perimeter in terms of defense and not allowing them to get to the rim, that's where things would be okay, right? Last year, one of the things you saw, the past 2 years, they kind of had the same approach, was we're not going to let you get into the paint. If you do get into the paint, you are going to score against us because we have zero rim protection, but we won't even let you get there in the first place. And that in itself is a good defense. It led them to have a good defensive rating, 6th best 2 years in a row. This year, they have bad perimeter defense, so they're also getting, now it's volume at the rim when you give up tons of shots, whereas before it was low volume at the rim, even though you let them score. That is how you fixed it. This year, it's not that there's no real rim protection. They didn't have rim protection the past 2 years. It's that the perimeter defense is letting guys get into the paint, basically at the point of attack. Not having Herb Jones for most of the year is a really big part of that here. William Therio says, should we really expect any trades to be made before the deadline? Kind of expected something to be done by now. I mean, yeah, they're going to make a trade before the trade deadline. They will, I guarantee you, because they're going to get under the luxury tax. Do you think if we brought Stan Van Gundy as a specialist, he could teach Zion to go how to go right? I feel like everyone's handle got better to understand because he knows how to dribble. That Stan era, that Stan year was not great. So no, you don't need to do that whatsoever. Keith asks, when can we start offering 10-day contracts? They could do it now, but no one's really doing that just yet. This is a good question. Shouting Church Boy 504. When is David Griffin going to be on the hot seat? It might be this off season. I think it depends on kind of how the rest of this goes. If Zion looks like an all-NBA guy, if Trey looks like an all-NBA guy, like that could kind of maybe change that. And so that's where you'll see it here. Ingram to Atlanta for Risa Shea and Capella makes sense. No, it doesn't. You could maybe get Capella. You're not getting Risa Shea, who was the number 1 overall pick. At what point do we fire Will Green? During the offseason, probably. Why do players play better after leaving NOLA? I mean, not everyone does. But also if you leave kind of midway through your career and you're supposed to get better, that's just like a natural progression here. Voice of Reason, that is a heck of a name right now with your comment of Luka ain't better than Zion. I don't know what to say to that one. Look, I'm a big Zion guy. I keep rolling with him. I've long said I would go down with the ship with him if the situation's right. It's not quite right now. He's not better than Luka. Very few players are better than Luka Doncic, in my opinion. Trey Murphy, yes, is untouchable here. Giving up on Luka wasn't smart, so why would the Pels make a dumb move like them? Everyone's giving that trade an F. So here's the difference. Luka and Zion aren't the same player, right? Like this is something I don't think people realize. Luka Doncic has played more games than Anthony Davis did. Luka Doncic took his team to the finals the last year. Luka Doncic has been a first-team All-NBA player the past 5 years in a row. Zion's not doing that. Zion is incredible when he plays. That's the difference. If Zion stayed on the court, even with the off-court stuff that he has going on, he could do that, but he doesn't. And that's a big part of the problem. That whole concept of Luka doesn't play or anything. Yes, he does. He absolutely does. So I don't think that's something that's worth kind of keeping in mind. I don't even think they're even kind of close to that. But that's kind of the concern here for a lot of people with the Pelicans fans and probably in the front office too of, do you trade Zion? Does he then put it together? And does it make you look even worse? And then you're the people that traded Zion Williamson. That's not a really good situation to be in here. Cody Arsenault says, how do you feel about Hawkins been playing recently? He's not been playing good. He's one-dimensional. He's a shooter. And if he's not shooting threes at an exceptionally high level, it really limits the impact that he can have on the court. If you can get a protected first-round pick for him, I would do that at the trade deadline, even if that means giving up on him that soon. I would definitely take that deal here. I'd give the Lakers BI for Dalton Connect and a chip-in future protected first-round pick to boot. Yeah, I would too, but the Lakers aren't doing that. They don't have the situation here, or they don't have the salary cap situation the Lakers do to be able to make that work here. Donato 77. We're going to start to wrap it up, by the way, here. You talked about other teams being desperate to make a deal. Is there any desperation on the Pels' part to make a deal to simply appease fans besides a minor move to deduct the tax? I said this during the actual part of the show of you absolutely do not want to be a desperate team here. They can't make the playoffs this year. They cannot make the playoffs here. They are 25 games under 500. How many games are left? I can do the math here, but I don't have the numbers in front of me. Let's do the math. They're 25 games under 500. There's 33 games left. So they just to get to 500, right? You would need to win 25 of those 33. That's winning three out of your next. That's actually better than 3 out of the next 4 games to slightly better than 3 out of the next 4 games to get to just 500 and maybe make the play-in tournament. That's not going to happen. So Jimmy Butler adding him in isn't going to happen. So, or at least doing that. So you're not going to kind of end up in that. So if they make a desperate kind of trade, a Jimmy Butler move or something like that, like you're going to hear me rail against them when it comes to all of that. So they should not be a desperate team like some of those other desperate teams are. Kapoor, is Pierre the Pelican untouchable or going to be traded for a second round pick? I am not moving Pierre at all when it comes to it. Christopher Friend says, are they going to be raising ticket prices next year? Season ticket prices. I've been told there should be a slight drop in ticket prices next year. I don't know if it'll be a significant amount, but they're going to then kind of spin it as we lowered ticket prices across the board, even if it's like $100 or $200 per person per season. If you have $5,000 tickets, $100 is technically lower, but I don't think that's the type of thing that is going to be like a significant number when it comes to all of that here. So that's, I think, where we're just going to end it. That's a little bit of the future when it comes to the team here. So I appreciate y'all so much for tuning in. These are a lot of fun. We'll keep doing these every now and then, particularly around trade rumors and stuff. We might have an emergency show or two coming up this week at some point. So I appreciate y'all so much for listening. We've gone about an hour here. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Subscribe to the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter here. You can subscribe over at lockedondaily.com. Just put your email in once you see the Locked On Pelicans logo. Get Locked On Pelicans in your inbox Monday through Friday. Support the channel by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. Tell friends about the show, too. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast for a reason. As always, I'm Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I think I said that already. I'll be back with y'all tomorrow. We're going to talk about blowing it all up unless something else happens. I appreciate y'all again, and I'll see y'all next time.